This is the College Blitz on CBS 17 Plus.
Well, now it's not just November, it's mid-November. And man, now the last couple weeks of the season really take on a lot of interest for all three Triangle teams for very different reasons. But all three have certainly set up some drama here for the last couple weeks of the regular season. We welcome you to the College Blitz. Kevin Holden, CBS 17 Plus. We got a lot to talk about, and it doesn't really matter which program you talk about. There is a lot to say. But I think we should start here with UNC and what they've done. Not just this past week, but over the last several weeks. So they beat Stanford 20-15 this past Saturday. The Tar Heels win again. The defense allows 3 points through the first three quarters. Stanford did score a couple of late touchdowns to make that thing look really interesting and give themselves a little life at the very end. But UNC was not going to be denied in this one. And so, in their last four games, Bill Belichick's Tar Heels have done this. They've lost by 3 on the road at Cal. They've lost in overtime to Virginia at home. They've won at Syracuse, and they've won at home against Stanford. And say what you will about where you thought the expectation of this program might be under Bill Belichick. They are not a national title contender. They are not an ACC title contender, but they have certainly shown improvement, and they're a different football team over these last 4 weeks. So before the season, Belichick talked about this, how it takes a while to get a group to gel, even at the professional level, with the preseason, all the practices, everything else that they do. It takes a while to make that team come together. And in this case, all the new players, new coaches, new system, new everything, it did take a while to come together, but clearly there has been progress. Clearly there has been movement forward for this team. Last 4 games have certainly looked a lot better than everything that we saw from this team before that. And now they reach an interesting stretch where they're 4-5. I mean, they were looking for a while like a 2-win football team. And now if they can take 2 of their last 3, we're talking bowl for this team, bowl eligibility, which is kind of wild if you want to know the truth. To have said that just 3 or 4 weeks ago would have been pretty interesting. One of the reasons it's happening, Gio Lopez has had a good, strong stretch of games. He's over 200 yards in each of his last 3 games. He's thrown 5 touchdowns total in his last 3 games. No interceptions in the last 2, the wins against Syracuse and at home against Stanford. And there's a bit of a theme there, which is UNC isn't playing well enough to give themselves a huge margin for error. But if he isn't throwing interceptions, Lopez isn't, then he's within that very small margin of error, and that's helping them win games. They had only 50 yards rushing in that win over Stanford, but they did hold the top 2 Stanford rushers to a total of 100 yards, and usually that'll help you win if you can stop the top 2 runners on the opposing team. So here it is, bold possibility for this UNC team as they beat Stanford. Belichick every week is the whole we're on to whoever the next opponent is, but he's got to take a little bit of satisfaction in the fact that his team has been competitive now literally for the last month.
Interesting 2 halves. Had a tough start offensively, and then, kind of got things going a little bit in the second half. Defensively played well really for 3 quarters, and then gave up the 2 2-minute drives at the end, and hung on with a onside kick recovery and a stop on defense. So like a lot of these games, they're close, they're tight, similar to some of the games that Stanford's played. Against Florida State, came down to the last play. BC was tight. They scored at the end of the game to beat San Jose. So there's a lot of games like that in this conference. And, that's what we're ready for. And, fortunately, we made enough plays to come out on top today. And so it's a good feeling. Just a lot of things we can still improve on, keep working on. And that's what we'll do, going forward and get ready for Wake.
Now, a little later on in the show, we'll break down why Wake Forest presents an especially difficult challenge for UNC, because the Demon Deacons have presented a difficult challenge for a few teams in the ACC this year. But UNC gets that win. They go to 4-5, and now we move on to Duke, who drops to 5-4. Their story, at least in this past week, looks exactly the opposite of UNC's story, which is to say they allowed 20 points in the first half to UConn. There were late touchdowns like UNC allowed, but the difference at UConn was those late touchdowns decided the game in a 37-34 loss. That was an 8-play, 75-yard drive that led to the winning touchdown, and Duke has hung its hat on defense. They've done that for a couple of years. When you do that late in a game with it that close, that's kind of a backbreaker, and that's exactly what happened to Duke in this road game at UConn. Nate Shepherd did have 100 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns there. Darian Mensah, again, we're talking opposites as Gio Lopez has hung on to the ball in limited turnovers. Mensah had 2 interceptions and lost a fumble in this loss at UConn. So the numbers don't necessarily bear out a very good performance for Duke, especially now that we're in the last quarter of the season. Just a few games left, not a lot of time to put stuff behind you and get going. There's a lot of goals still in front of Duke that they have not accomplished. But we will say this, scheduling this game when they did may have turned out to be an advantage because, yeah, it's a loss, and that doesn't help your momentum, but it's a non-conference loss, which means their ACC record is unaffected. And as they host Virginia this Saturday, you're talking about 2 teams with 1 loss each in the ACC. So Duke is still, again, goal-wise, where they want to be. They still have a chance to end up in the ACC championship game, which is tremendous. It's just that they're going to have to forget rapidly about what happened up in the Constitution State, Connecticut.
Well, I think, listen, you get through the course of the year, you recognize these games are going to be close. And anyone who thinks this month is going to be any different is crazy, right? This is college football. I've said how many times we're in a land of parity. Preparation and mindset matter when you go on the road and you play a team like that who we knew would have, all the stakes to have their best performance of the year in front of their best crowd of the year and all that. And what I tell the guys is that every week your best is required. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get the collective mindset, the collective preparation set where you can have a consistency of performance week in and week out. And we mentioned to our guys all week we had outstanding respect for Connecticut and what they did really well and how they would be a threat. And then when you have turnovers go against you 2-0 and against a team that doesn't turn the ball over, that's why they win. And we've been pretty good at not turning it over. And those are the fine margins that equal a 3-point loss.
And so Duke decides to move along here and face in their next matchup. They'll be going against Virginia. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That one, man, you're talking about a season decider, not to push the rivalry games at the end of the year to the back of the line, but Duke and Virginia is going to be the litmus test, right? After 9 games played, Duke's got some work to do, and they're going to have to figure it out kind of rapidly there against a Virginia team that's had a pretty good season to this point. Some ups and downs, but generally a very good season. NC State was off this past week, and there's a good and bad to it. They beat Georgia Tech, that huge upset win at Carter Finley Stadium the previous Saturday. Fans rushing the field, the feel-good vibes around the program got to stay for another week. They got to sort of sit on that and let that be where they are, where their feet are, coming out of that win. But obviously now you've got to turn around and put this into the last 3 games of the season, and NC State has a very difficult last 3 games of their campaign. And so now they've got to find a way to take the momentum for what will be a 2-week-old game by the time they take the field in Miami this coming Saturday. And real quick check of the other college football programs in the area. Fayetteville State came out with a regular season-ending win against Winston-Salem State. Unfortunately, it just came a little bit short of the CIAA championship game. They were super close. If Johnson C. Smith had lost, Fayetteville State would have ended up in Durham playing for that championship, but not how it works. And so Fayetteville State just a smidge, just a little bit short there of that conference title game, which would have been certainly interesting. NC Central did beat Norfolk State this past week. They are still going strong as they will get ready to host South Carolina State in a Friday game. That MEAC schedule, man, it's just one after another. There is no break when you get to the start of that MEAC schedule. So that's a look at what happened this past week. Now we start to look at what's going to happen this weekend with some pretty big games. Everybody in the Triangle now has 3 games left. Everybody in the Triangle is not worried about off weeks, not worried about down opponents, anything like that. Important games against important teams to finish out the last 3 games of the regular season. And the story isn't written for any of the Triangle teams. Nobody is bowl eligible yet. And at the same time, nobody has written their story for a winning season. you've got a lot of different balls in the air here for these three teams, either 4 wins or 5 wins. NC State and Duke both with 5 wins so far, and UNC with 4, with 3 weeks to go. So there's a lot to be decided. We're going to break down this coming week's games. We're going to start with Duke against Virginia. We'll do that after the break. This is College Blitz on CBS 17.
This is the College Blitz on CBS 17 Plus. This is the College Blitz on CBS 17 Plus.
Well, it gets really interesting now as we get to the last 3 weeks of college football's regular season here in the Triangle. Duke, NC State, UNC, all three with the big storyline still ahead. And why don't we start with the Blue Devils, who welcome Virginia, welcome the Cavaliers to Wallace Wade Stadium on Saturday. Right now, in the ACC standings, it's pretty packed at the top. There are 5 teams in the conference with 1 loss. Georgia Tech is 5-1. Virginia is 5-1. Pitt is 5-1. SMU is 5-1. And then Duke is right behind them at 4-1. They'll play another conference game, one more than the other teams will here down the stretch. So in that way, Duke does own their fate just a little bit more than the other teams. Now, we're just talking a little bit of elimination here. You've got 5 teams there at the top of the conference with 1 loss. Duke and Virginia face each other. One of them is going to get eliminated from those ranks, and one's going to continue on as a 1-loss team entering the last 2 weeks of their season. I would argue that this game is the crux, the centerpiece for Duke of their entire season, at least to this point. I mean, if they get to the final week of the regular season and need a win to get in the ACC championship, clearly that becomes their biggest game. But right now, this is the biggest game they've had. You beat Virginia at home, you reestablish confidence after a loss to UConn, you maintain that standing in the 1-loss realm there in the ACC, and you hope for other teams to continue to lose, and you keep that chance to go to Charlotte in your mind. There's a lot at stake here for Duke. Virginia, by the way, just lost to Wake Forest, and they've been human of late, maybe is the best way to describe it. That's a team in Virginia that lost their starting quarterback. They almost lost to UNC in Chapel Hill, and they've had some other games too where they've come up a bit short. Their offense has certainly struggled in the last several weeks, and for a Duke team that wants to win with defense and wants to hang their head on defense, this is the kind of game to do it, to try to maximize it against Virginia. Here is Nate Shepard as Duke gets ready to use their run game against the Cavaliers.
Definitely, the run game, I think, is a big part of our offense. I think we could run the ball more than we do sometimes, but, once we get it going, I think our offense is just hits a stride. So, when we can run the ball, it opens up the pass game, opens up everything else. So definitely the run game helps. Definitely some disappointing losses, obviously today, losing to, you do have to give credit to UConn. They came out and played a good game, but, in our headspace, we just got to come back tomorrow for our meetings and get ready. We still do have a path to the ACC championship game. So all of our hopes and dreams are still ahead of us, despite all the losses.
That is Nate Shepard. He was talking from Connecticut right after the loss to UConn. Which is probably why there was a little bit of a downtone into how he was feeling in that moment. Certainly not what Duke wanted from a momentum standpoint, from a standards standpoint, defensively especially. But again, non-conference game, and now these last 3 for them are conference games, and that's you get a chance to decide your own fate. There is nothing wrong with that. All right, NC State is going to be on the road Saturday. They will be at Miami, and NC State has got a pretty tough path here through the last third or last fourth, I should say, of their schedule. They'll have Miami, they'll have Florida State, who, depending on what you see from Florida State, you could get one of the better teams in the country, or you could get a team that just rolls right over. So we'll see what happens there. And then, of course, that last game of their regular season, a very big one there. Miami has allowed the fewest points of any defense in the ACC. They have not even gotten to triple digits of points allowed. 89 points allowed, should say, through 9 games in the ACC. NC State has scored 170 on offense, and you compare that against the Miami number, it feels pretty good, but there are 7 other teams in the ACC who have scored more points to this point in the season. So NC State's offense has been good, but it hasn't been elite in the conference, and they're facing a Miami defense that has been elite in the conference. Miami, though, has not been so elite as a team after their start to the season. The Hurricanes were 5-0 to start the year, but they are 2-2 in their 4 games since. They lost to SMU a couple of weeks ago, and then they lost to Louisville a little bit before that. Not a ton of shame in either of those losses. I'm sure that Miami folks would tell you that they should have beaten Louisville. Those were two close games, Louisville and SMU. SMU gives a lot of teams trouble. They're talented no matter how this comes out for them in the standings. SMU is a burr in the side of a lot of teams that they play, and Miami was one example. There is one other factor in this game that you'll have to watch out for when you're talking about energy and momentum, emotion, things like that. And that is that this is Miami's 8th home game of the year and their final home game of 2025, which means it's senior day, which means there's going to be a lot of people on this roster giving a little bit of extra effort, knowing that this is the end for them playing in front of their home fans. That's significant. Every team honors their seniors. The crowd is different. The energy is different. And with Miami in the middle of this chase for the ACC, it's only going to add to the emotion that's there. Dave Doran's team has certainly had its share of schedule quirks, and it isn't any easier for them as they finish out the last quarter of their regular season.
Well, I think finish, is a big thing in our program, and I'm sure everybody talks about it. We train the way that we, look at our schedule with the guys and how many reps they take. And, you can burn them out pretty quick. And it's a long season. We had 8 games without a bye week. 2 years ago, we had 7 without a bye week this year. And so you've got to be calculated in your volume because it's a long season. The month of November is really important. I mean, it's really important. And you get on a run here at the end of the season and do some really good things. And I definitely see the characteristics. It starts with leadership. I mean, you got to have players that want that. They want to finish. It matters to them, and it's said all the time, you're going to remember what happens in November. And it's really a month that can change a lot of seats in bowl games, in playoff contention, all that, and rankings. And so, this team's built for that. They're built to be finishers. It's a part of our DNA, and we've got a tough finishing schedule.
So those last 3 games, Dave Doran's certainly well aware that the story of 2025 and how this team will be judged is going to have a lot to do with what happens in these next 3 games. This one at Miami, maybe the toughest of the 3. Florida State then comes to Carter Finley Stadium next Friday. And there's all kinds of weird stuff with a Friday game that late in a season. Florida State's fighting for their own stuff. NC State most certainly will be fighting for, if it isn't bowl eligibility, it may be more, right? A better bowl. So just so much at stake in each of the last 3 contests for NC State. That is one of those do not go anywhere kind of situations because there will be some drama there. And remember, the last time NC State took the field, they beat Georgia Tech and beat them pretty handily. So if they're able to capture that momentum, take it to Miami, who knows? Maybe they pull off something there against the Hurricanes, take that at home and do the same thing against Florida State. I mean, now you're looking at a completely different season and a completely different team. Dave Doran was talking about retirement rumors a couple of weeks ago, trying to answer those. And if they finish strong, the narrative changes very quickly. That is a November to remember, as he was saying. And then there is UNC, who is going to be at Wake Forest here in this, third from the last week of the regular season. And, man, the thing about Wake Forest, talk about just a team that's given other teams fits. Wake Forest, first of all, is a 6-3 football team, and they have beaten SMU, and they beat them 13-12. They beat Virginia. That game was 16-9, and they had a 1-point loss against Georgia Tech. So while we've talked about all these different one-loss teams and teams that have stepped up and fought and done all this other stuff, Wake Forest has, honestly, they're a couple of plays away from being a pretty special team in 2025, and they have come up with some pretty special wins to this point. Now, you heard those scores, 13-12, 16-9. These are low-scoring affairs, and what that means is fundamentals are going to be important. Avoiding turnovers is going to be important. Maximizing the chances that you have are going to be important. You can't lose out on a drive where you might pick up 3 points, because if you only score 10 or 13 or 15 or whatever in the course of a game, you really need to have every one of those points on the board. The good news for UNC, as we mentioned earlier in the show, Gio Lopez has had a very good last couple of games on the turnover category, stayed away from interceptions. That's going to be important when they're facing Wake Forest on the road. Here's Bill Belichick on the beginning of an interesting stretch of games for UNC. 3 straight games within the state of North Carolina to finish the season. He's using a reference here to the state championship, but I think that's interesting because the state championship is going to define seasons for not just UNC, but other teams in North Carolina as well.
I've been involved in a lot of them before, but I'd say the ones, regionally are just different. In Tobacco Road, we've certainly talked about that with people who have played in a lot of these games or coached in them or been around them, and so it's, historically we're catching up on it, but, we even saw it in the Charlotte game, that there's, it's a little bit different when you play in state, and every high school kid wants to win a state championship. And so, when you're playing at this level, it's important to win in the state. And, we know it's going to be, they're a good football team no matter where they're located, but we know it's an in-state game. And it's going to be tough, and it's their place. And, I'm sure there'll be a lot of energy in the stadium.
That is a team in Wake Forest that really wants to make noise. I mean, more than just wins. They would like to turn some heads, and they have a chance to do that, facing a couple of Triangle teams in the last 3 weeks of their season. That's going to be big. So, I mean, you use the word big. They're all big at this point, and certainly that's the case for all 3 Triangle teams. Duke trying to knock Virginia out of that rank of the rank of the one-loss teams in the ACC. NC State looking for a road upset to pair with their home upset that they just had against Georgia Tech, and UNC traveling to a difficult and underrated Wake Forest team, hoping to continue their run of being very competitive over the last 4 games, couple of wins and a couple of very close losses in that stretch. Campbell, by the way, will finish their home part of the regular season this week as well. Elon pays a visit to Bowie's Creek as Braxton Harris's group wraps up 2025, at least the home portion of their schedule. They do have one more road game next week to finish out their regular season. And NC Central and South Carolina State, we mentioned that earlier in the show. That's a Friday game. Remember that the CIAA championship game is Saturday in Durham, so NC Central will play on Friday, and then you've got the CIAA title to be decided on Saturday. We only have a few more weeks here on the College Blitz, but we are certainly not fading away. This is more of a burning out situation. These last couple of weeks are going to be season deciders for your teams in the Triangle, some of which will be facing each other, big rivalry games. You remember last year how emotional that was, the post-game tension that existed there. Imagine we'll see something similar here in these last couple weeks from 3 competitive teams that are still looking to accomplish a lot of things, whether it's a spot in the ACC championship game if you're Duke, or bowl eligibility if you're NC State or UNC. Certainly all important things that they're looking to get to and still have to work for. That's the thing. No one has arrived at any of their goals yet, and they only have a couple of weeks to get there. So it's going to be a lot of drama, a lot of storylines here in these weeks to come. So we hope you'll join us in these next couple of weeks of the College Blitz here on CBS 17+, because these things are only going to get bigger as we get toward the end of November. I'm Kevin Holden. We appreciate you watching. Join us next week for the Blitz.
This is the College Blitz on CBS 17+.